sentence. And that's the place where we have to start. Because we know that in Hebrew, in our Torah learning, we have 4 different parts of it. We have Pshat, Drash, Remez, and Sod. And that stands for the simple meaning, an interpretation, a hint of what it's saying, and then the secret behind what it's really saying. And the Torah is so deep that we have all 4 of these parts of everything we read from the Holy Scriptures is happening simultaneously. And it's only through learning in a organized fashion that we can really grasp it. So my concept was, let's help the student get the underlying meaning of the pasuk, and see, this is powerful, because when King David wrote this, I mean, this is a long story. You got time?
I got time, but I really want you to get to the nitty-gritty. I want an example that you work with us.
Okay, so let's do an example. Thank you. Because I could go on about King David and the past and his life. And,
he was amazing.
And I researched all the King David from the experiential. I lived in the mountains, places where he lived, and I really tried to understand who he was and what he was trying to give us. Because what he gave us was a spiritual journal of his life, which really stems from Adam Rishon, from the first man who gave him his life, and comes down to us today for a way to use it. But that's a long story, so I'll get to your question.
Well, that's a very interesting story. How long is that course?
How long did this work?
How long does it take? If you were to explain this course as a lecture, how long would it take you?
I'll give you the short version. Adam Rishon has 3 letters in it.
Right.
Aleph, Dalet, Mem. And that stands for, Aleph is Adam, Dalet is David, and Mem is Mashiach. That means that within the name of Adam is all of history. And I came across something, that just astounded me. I never saw it in any book, but it just hit me. That King David came into power in Hebron in the year 2884, give or take a few years. And he passed away 40 years after that, when he was in power. So if you take the time of 0, when Adam was created, to that time that King David was, and multiply it by 2, we get now.
Wow.
We get just about now, give or take 10, 20 years. That means if Adam, the name of Adam is symmetrical, we would have 0, King David in the middle, and Mashiach at the end points. And what hit me was, it's possible that this opus that King David gave us could be the key to bringing the Mashiach, because he's basically fixing the mistake that Adam and Chava did in the garden. And
that's a very wonderful insight. I think that most of the Kabbalistic works actually confirm that Tehilim is the key to understanding what's going on in the universe. In fact, the Kitvei Ari goes into that. Not that I've read it, but I understand that he teaches how the key is found in Tehilim. Also, when you read Rabbi Nachman's works in Likutei HaMaharan, he also talks all the time about Psukim in Tehilim and shows you how they actually give you understanding of the spiritual mechanics in the world.
Yeah,
so this is a very big insight, I think.
It is, when I saw that King David came about 450 years after the giving of the Torah, and he basically absorbed all of that power of all of our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, coming into the Egyptian exile and slavery, and then coming out and receiving the Torah. And he, in this poetry, absorbs all of that. And he was given a Ruach HaKodesh, the spirit that from above, and the way they were written. I mean, the story is astounding, and I invite everyone to just go in and study the plot of the whole thing in Shmuel, Aleph, and Beit, and where it's not the Tehilim are not mentioned, but the spiritual journal of that life that King David lived, which will astound you in the action packed events that occurred, it will give you an insight. So your question is, what is it? This is really the question. What does it do for me, right? Everybody always asks this. Well, that's terrific, but what does it do for me? So this is what happens. You take one pasuk. Here is 104:10, right? And so this is from the chapter 104, and the verse is 10. So it says in Hebrew, Hameshalech mayanim banachalim ben harim yalechum. Okay, just as an example, you could pick this a lot of it, but we want to get down to the nitty gritty. So we go through what the meaning is, and that's also could be open to interpretation. But I got to give a handle to a student on what the meaning is, and then from that you could come up with other interpretations. And in the bibliography, many of our scholars have come up with other ways to read this pasuk. So he sends the springs into streams. And these springs in this pasuk are coming from underground. And everyone knows in the land of Israel, we survive on the underground waters. Because we get rain, we survive on the rain and the underground springs. And if you live in the desert, and it doesn't rain in Israel from Pesach until Rosh Hashanah, until Sukkot. And so we don't have rain at that time. And we depend on these springs. So King David in his life was running away from many enemies. His own father-in-law, King Saul, which I could see, he was appointed by Shmuel Navi, and I could see from your window his cover of the prophet who anointed both Shaul and King David.
Right.
So that's pretty amazing that we're sitting here in your beautiful apartment looking at that. So David ran, and many years of his life were running, and he had to depend on these springs. So I could imagine him sitting, looking at parts of nature. What did he have? Nothing, and he had to survive: water, a little bit of food, some herbs, whatever he ate, and he had to come to some understanding. He saw that God sends the springs from underground with a powerful pressure that comes up to the top of the ground, and then he says these streams flow between the mountains, and then they start to come down, and they're under the sunlight, and they're running through the mountains, finding their way, just like Rabbi Akiva's story, where the water found its way between the rocks, and it's finding its way through the mountains. Now, that's the pasuk, and if we take it in context, we should read the whole chapter, and we'll see how that works. But I found that when we have a group, and in a class we'll have a group, and I'll go through that simple meaning, and then instead of me giving the interpretation, I'll say to each one, let's split up in a chavrusa, and you find, what does it mean to you? What is your personal connection with what we just read? And part of the discussion then between two people, any two people, will be what it means. And then the other part will be, well, what it means for me. Wow. I'll give you an example. That underground spring could be my hidden talents that no one sees, and I am living that, and nobody really knows who I am, and that power, that pressure, it's so much energy that I have to find within my own recourse in order to bring this up to the surface. And when it's up at the surface, then people will see who I am, what I do. And then I'll just flow under the sunshine, and people will see, and I'll be able to give that and give water, which is really about life force. Water's everything, and gives herbs the greenery, and waters the animals, and gives man life. And then it'll go flow. I'll find my way, and I'll find my course. That's just one example. And some people will find another way. And I'm telling you, within 20 people, you'll have 20 different interpretations of this one verse.